Morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. What a privilege to be invited to speak at the 10th Anniversary Congress and to speak this morning with such a distinguished panel, particularly Sir Alan, whose acumen and insight and humanity actually informs us all in a lot of what we've done and the Foresight program. I'm a little bit nervous this morning, I may say, partly for that reason, but partly also the last occasion I came to Congress was in Bristol. It was exactly 2 years ago at the coffee break that somebody said, "Do you know your school's on fire?" And so I'm rather hopeful that I won't get any kind of message like that this morning. Habitat, try to deal with all of this and by going over the top, if you like, of it all. Two things to say about this title slide. Too many words, Mozart. And secondly, that these are the most important words. Actually, this was the working title of the zero draft. The UN likes zero drafts. And for reasons become apparent, of course, Habitat this time is about the city. And I use these words, city-focused, people-centered, and integrated, to keep us on message, if you like. And it went through 8 drafts, and we never managed to get rid of them. So it's a bit of a mouthful. Habitat 1, launched with great enthusiasm, 76. Moshe Safdie's work, the Israeli architect, was perhaps his most memorable thing, an era of optimism. And it was great that people were getting together to talk about settlement and habitat, actually, which were not really discussed currently at that time. Habitat 2 in Istanbul was very worthy. It was wordy. And it didn't have quite the same traction, if you like. So when it came to dealing with Habitat 3 in this duodecennial event that the UN has, people were very conscious, I think, of the century of the city, the 21st century, and therefore a new urban agenda. The focus was taken more towards the city rather than settlement and habitat, for example. This guy was appointed by the Secretary General, Johan Claus, to run Habitat 3. And he has, former mayor of Barcelona, of course, politician. And he's done some things that caused me to chuckle, I must say, because he's done what politicians do, which is to set up a whole series of initiatives, many of which overlap and are in tension. And this has caused the Unicrats, well, we have bureaucrats and Eurocrats, and I call them Unicrats. This has caused them all manner of angst because, oh, aren't you supposed to be doing that? Oh, but I thought we were doing that. And of course, that's the whole point. That's exactly why Claus has done it, if you like. He is also working extremely hard to move the paradigm from the identification of issues to action. Many people here who are engaged in interaction and empowerment and engagement with communities will recognize this process, that you need a dialogue, you need the involvement of stakeholders, and there's certainly been a lot done in that regard, and I'll come back to that, about the city we need, for example. And I think Claus is to be complimented for that. Well, you will know, of course, about the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, Paris, just at the end of last year. About the best thing you can say about having 17 Sustainable Development Goals is it's a prime number. There are other prime numbers, 3, 5, and 7, that might possibly be better if you want a hard-worked mayor to remember what you're talking about. And the 71 measures for smart cities just had me pulling my hair out. Of course, the issue here is, and I apologize for the quality of this slide, it's the proverbial bowl of spaghetti. We all know what's in it. We know what the ingredients are. We know what it tastes like. But when you take your fork and you're about to eat, you've no idea how the parts join up. And we have made dealing with cities fabulously complex in trying to address things. The UN, of course, enjoys a bit of complexity too. It has 5 regions. And it's further compounded by the fact that some countries are in both or more than one region. So that can distort the figures a bit when you're trying to understand the statistics. The thing I was asked to do is look at the UNECE, the Economic Commission for Europe, which in terms of this is about the simplest diagram I could find about the UN and how it goes about its business is for the environment program. And one of the things that Klaus asked for was a regional report about trends in the 5 regions. The Economic Commission for Europe, of course, as we all know, covers North America, the EU, EFTA, Russia, CIS countries, and a collection of countries involving Turkey, Israel, and the Balkans, for example. Quite how that came about is difficult to know, but if you think that these were set up just after the Second World War, 4 of the permanent security members of the Security Council are in this region, and it was a really good way for Russia and America to keep an eye on one another, I suppose, by coming together in what was euphemistically really called the Economic Commission for Europe. Anyway, this is the territory, 4 distinct subregions. How it is that a boy from the back streets of Glasgow came to be asked to do this is something for the bar later on, I think. But it was interesting, and as I've made the progression from being a fairly or modestly prosperous practitioner to an impoverished academic, it does allow me to ask the kind of questions and make the inquiries. I was interested in this proposition. So a population of about 1.3 billion in 56 countries, which includes the microstates. So there are 3 continental countries, Russia, Canada, United States, and there's San Marino, Monaco, and Andorra, all who have an equal vote in these things. There's the distribution of population. The other thing to mention is that the UNECE is, to a greater or lesser extent, the Garden of Eden. It sits between the Tropic of Cancer and the Arctic Circle. It has the boreal and temperate forest, which is growing at 3% per annum, which is a huge oxygen engine. It's more significant than the Amazon rainforest. So there's a lot of riches here. The UNECE countries surround the Arctic. But the critical thing in terms of our discussions, there are 263 cities within this region of 500,000 or more, 45% of global GDP, 66% of the world's fresh water, and 17% of the population. And we wonder why people want to come here. Well, I've got time for that. So let's get down to this is what it's all about. This is work done by the Joint Research Centre for the EU about the distribution of cities. The narrative, the rhetoric, of course, is all about megacities and the growth of megacities, 5 million or more. This shows their distribution across the world. There's not so many of them in the northern hemisphere. And I'm sorry, some of these things are a bit arcane, but it's important. But we will get closer, I think, to some of these things. But this looks at city population by size, by part of the world. The dark color is the big cities. The light color is the small cities, 50,000 or more. By the way, with that definition, at least 2 of Scotland's cities aren't cities. And you can see that, for example, in Oceania, which is mainly Australia and those countries, how there is a significant group of cities in one of these population cohorts and not at all in others. Becomes interesting when you look at density. Light is a small city, dark is a big city, 5 million or more. And the countries within the UNECE, North America, Europe, Russia, CIS, are on the left of the slide there. And you can see the density gradients going up to the biggest cities, with North America being least dense and Russia more dense, but completely different to the narrative and the rhetoric in Asia, Africa, where look at the density of the small cities, for example. We all understand this more, of course, if we see visualization of these things. This is Atlanta and Barcelona to the same scale, same population, radically different population footprint. Poor old Atlanta gets it quite a lot because somebody else has done this study looking at, you can put the 8 world cities, Karachi through to Jinan, population of 100 million, into the space occupied by Atlanta. This at least, I think, prompted people like Ed Glaeser, for example, to make the point that space actually isn't the issue. Glaeser's famous words, you can fit all of the world's population into townhouses in the state of Texas. So it's not the amount of space that's the issue, it's more to do with what we do with it. You can see the geography of sprawl at night, of course, from space. But I think when we started to get into this, one of the most interesting, significant things is United States, population 320 million, Canada, population 32 million, both countries the same size, more or less, geographically. Both cities have 82% of their people living in cities, which means there's a lot of what the Scottish government somewhat unkindly refers to as Mamba country in both countries, miles and miles of bugger all. But the other interesting thing is that although 82% of the United States people live in cities, 75% of them live in these city clusters. And these city clusters are all within the Marchetti constant. They're all within an hour of one another. There's Bostwash, population 52 million. The Great Lakes, 55 million. The Texas Triangle, 20 million, and so on. We see this in other parts of the UNECE as well. Europe is not quite so bad, perhaps because of the policy of dispersal, the bunch of grapes by the EU. But there is a trend to what we termed super cities, these clusters, if you like. Aggregation, agglomeration economies in clusters, the aging and migration I will come back to. We did all the stuff you would expect us to do about GDP. We looked at the changes since Habitat last time and also the effect of the crash. But it starts to get really interesting when you look at the interconnectedness. I'm sure you all know this stuff about Facebook decided they would do a map of the connections. They were expecting some kind of grid to appear. And of course, when they mapped the connections on Facebook, what came out was a map of the world. When you superimpose that on air travel and the frequency of air travel, you discover the volume of air travel that actually takes place within or between these super city clusters. And it gets even more fascinating when you map the great universities of the world and you look at the coincidence between the great universities of the world as a metaphor for all of education and higher education and the relationship of that with the urban distribution. China's solution, of course, is an interesting one in that regard. I'll come back to that. The key thing about economy of cities, I think, is that we found the knowledge economy is built on a digital revolution, but it's bringing about massive opportunity to urban change and new forms of space and use, and it's accelerating urban concentration. So although we've got things like Francis Cairncross writing about the death of distance, yes, you can telework from a croft in the Highlands, but the simple fact of the matter is people do not want to do that, and they agglomerate. In terms of the social issues, we looked at all of the issues there, and in particular, this region of the world has an aging population due to longevity, but it has a double whammy of low fertility, and therefore a lot of the problems that we have is the inability to sustain ourselves. And I weep, I think, at the constant misrepresentation of some of these facts on the television as we debate our future, when it is widely regarded that Europe needs about 50 million people to sustain itself over the next 20 or so years. There was a long discussion, of course, and there's a lot in the report about housing, affordability, accessibility, inequality, and speed, that the public sector simply can't keep up with the speed at which this changes. And there are contradictory trends with closed communities, shopping malls, but at the same time, the reaffirmation of public space. Environment, it's about coasts, river basins. All of these 263 cities, well, not all of them, I think Kansas City is an exception, are on the great rivers of the world. Look at the Mississippi, Missouri basin, draining something like two-thirds of the, well, a third of the United States, the whole Volga River system. And just en passant, the Great Lakes. Look at the stress in the Great Lakes, and it's not at all surprising if you got 55 million people living on your doorstep about where those things are. So two-thirds of the world's fresh water, largest emitters of greenhouse gases, as you would expect, flooding, heat waves, and environmental threats are, of course, health threats. In terms of governance, growth of city networks, urban governance decentralized universally, national governments formulate policy and regulation, but urban management is local, but a real question about whether or not urban governance can limit sprawl, for example, and the effect of concentration. We tried to simplify some of these into a few cycles. The cycle of urban concentration, for example, that these are self-fulfilling prophecies, unless that is, we seek to do something about it. So urbanization, concentration, agglomeration, interconnected clusters, urban shrinkage in the places outside keeps feeding that loop. There's a countervailing demographic cycle, which I've talked about, low fertility, aging, migration to successful cluster cities, reinforces their performance, creates further challenges to isolated cities. This leads to shrinking cities, outward migration, declining. These are virtually a mirror of one another, oversized infrastructure. However, both sets of cities are sprawling for different reasons. Edge city or moving out, hollowing out in the shrinking cities. This leads to, as we all know, erosion of the functions of the urban core, ineffectiveness of public transport, metropolitan coalescence. The industrial city, at least in the developed north, is to a greater or lesser extent a busted flush. We have exported our industrial qualities and manufacturing offshore. The industrial city needed significant in-migration to grow. It needed the bodies to grow the population. Whereas the knowledge city, which is something that we are all engaged in, the academy is engaged in this archive of great places and spaces that Steve talked about, needs no spatial requirement other than proximity. And that proximity takes place around universities primarily, airports, cultural quarters. There's a demand for mixed use and the experience economy, authenticity, if you like, and it has rocketed place and the importance of place, image, and attractiveness up the agenda. So there is this paradigm shift in the developed countries of the world and throughout the UNECE. The compact city, and the OECD's work on this is very good, is just about the only game in town. It's got its problems, as we all know, but it does concentrate an effective labor market. It creates dense development. It's much more efficient to be able to create integrated public transport and efficient public services. The other one is the resilient city, and whereas the last one was based on OECD, this is Rockefeller. The thing that worries me about this, though, if you were to say to somebody like Corbusier, we want you to look after the health and well-being, the economy and society, the health of the economy and society, provide infrastructure and a high-quality environment, and do it with leadership and strategy, Corbusier would say, I have just the thing. It's called Plan Voisin. So what is behind that and what we mean by that cycle of resilience is incredibly important. Now, I don't have time this morning, just as I wrap up, to go through that whole list. But in the top right there, fostering long-term and integrated planning, I think is absolutely critical. So the UNECE's report card, I've mentioned a lot of it. It is the Garden of Eden. It's wealthy. We are headed for 80% of population in cities, but a huge number in agglomerative supercities, and we don't entirely know what to do with the rest. The knowledge economy and the digital revolution is accelerating urban concentration and accelerating economic and housing inequality. We know that, and it's exacerbated by aging and migration. Cities on coasts and rivers, big issue in terms of risk. Environmental threats are health threats, and there's an awareness of environmental concern and quality of life, but our ambition is outstripping our ability to do anything about it. Compact and resilient cities based on integrated governance of place for people is the key message. We could say that the UK is one super city. This is slightly tongue-in-cheek, just to finish. We've got Glasborough-Dean, New Middleland, the Northern Horseshoe, I called it. So what, of course, is south of Watford. The other thing to say is that the world is coming down right now with declarations. We've got the Jakarta Declaration on sustainable urbanism, got the Barcelona Declaration on public space, we've got the Jakarta Declaration on informal settlement. Steve, you referred to the Amsterdam Declaration in your blog, the Prague Declaration. I haven't seen the cover of that one yet. But tomorrow, we've got 4 or 5 greats and a debate. Prophecies from 5 city leaders, it says on the website. I've seen the future and it's integrated, I wonder. So what about the London Declaration for the future of urbanism, the city we need? I'm going over to the UNECE in a couple of weeks' time. I've got an interview with the Executive Secretary. I hope not to be fired. But it would be nice to say, well, you know, there's going to be a London Declaration as well, and it's going to be focused on the future of urbanism and the city we need. Thank you.